Janice Soprano needed a change, a fresh start. She found a beautiful Victorian on the outskirts of town. It was a steal. The realtor mumbled something about bad luck and previous owners. Janice, never one to be superstitious, dismissed it as nonsense. She moved in the next week. Little did she know the Soprano curse had followed her. The house was imposing. Dark wood, stained glass windows, and silence. Lots of silence. Janice unpacked boxes, her unease growing with each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. She felt a presence, a coldness that settled deep in her bones. Janice tried to shake it off. "It's just an old house," she muttered to herself. But the shadows seemed to lengthen, and the silence was broken only by the creaks and groans of the house settling, or so she thought. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Janice lay in bed, listening to every rustle and groan. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Or was it the wind? A chill snaked down her spine. She pulled the covers tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. Janice told herself it was just the stress of the move. But deep down, a seed of fear had been planted. Days turned into weeks. Janice tried to make the house her own, but the unsettling feeling remained. She started hearing things, soft whispers, her name called from empty rooms, footsteps on the stairs when no one was home. Janice dismissed them as tricks of the mind. The house was getting to her, playing on her nerves. She just needed to get a grip. One night, Janice was startled awake by a cold breath on her cheek. She sat up in bed, heart racing. The room was ice cold, and she could have sworn she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed. But when she blinked, it was gone. Janice switched on the bedside lamp, her hand trembling. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, echoing her name, taunting her. Janice tried to ignore them, but the constant feeling of dread was taking its toll. She was losing sleep. Her nerves were shot. Janice began to wonder if maybe there was something to this haunted house nonsense after all. The ghosts were becoming bolder. Janice started seeing them in broad daylight, fleeting glimpses of men she didn't recognize. Their faces were etched with pain and anger. Their eyes, full of accusation, followed her every move. Janice tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, an overactive imagination. But deep down, she knew the truth. These weren't just any ghosts. These were the ghosts of her family's past. One face stood out, a man with slicked back hair and a cruel smile. He seemed familiar, but Janice couldn't place him. She saw him everywhere, in the reflection of the windows, lurking in the shadows of the hallway, even staring back at her from her morning coffee. His presence was suffocating, his eyes burning with a chilling intensity. Janice couldn't escape the feeling that she knew these men. Their faces haunted her dreams, their whispers invaded her thoughts. They were connected to her family, to Tony. She was sure of it, but how? The question gnawed at her, fueling her fear and her growing paranoia. Janice was trapped in a house of horrors, haunted by the sins of her brother. Janice tried to tell people about the ghosts. Her therapist dismissed it as anxiety. Her friends thought she was losing it. Even her own family, jaded as they were, scoffed at her stories. "You're just trying to get attention, Janice," they'd say. But Janice knew the truth. She was living it. The isolation was unbearable. Janice felt like she was going crazy. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. She stopped leaving the house, afraid of what she might see, of who might see her. The ghosts were winning. They were isolating her, driving her deeper into despair. Janice was trapped both by the ghosts and by her family's disbelief. She was a prisoner in her own home, haunted by the sins of her past and the ghosts of her present. The walls were closing in, and Janice was running out of time. She needed help, but who could she turn to? Who would believe her? Desperate, Janice decided to take matters into her own hands. She had read about seances, about communicating with the dead. It seemed like a long shot, but she was out of options. She invited a local medium, a woman with piercing eyes and a calming presence, to her home. The seance took place in the living room. The air was thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of dread. Janice sat across from the medium, their hands resting on a small, round table. The medium closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "We welcome you here," she intoned, her voice echoing in the silent room. "We ask for you to make your presence known. The room grew colder. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Janice felt a shiver run down her spine. She glanced nervously at the medium, whose eyes were still closed. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of the women's breathing. Then a low growl seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Janice's eyes flew open in terror. The seance had begun. Section 6. Descent into Darkness. The medium spoke to the spirits. Their voices, raspy and filled with anger, filled the room. Janice listened in horror as they identified themselves one by one. Each name was a gut punch, a chilling reminder of her brother's bloody past. These were Tony's victims, their souls trapped in the house, seeking retribution. The medium's voice grew more urgent. "They're drawn to you, Janice," she said, her eyes fixed on Janice's. "They say you have unfinished business." Janice's blood ran cold. Unfinished business? What could they possibly mean? She had tried to distance herself from Tony's world, to build a life of her own, but it seemed like the past was not so easily forgotten. The air crackled with energy. Objects started moving around the room, thrown by unseen hands. Janice cowered in fear, her heart pounding in her chest. The medium, her face pale and streaked with tears, struggled to maintain control. "You need to help them, Janice," she gasped. "They need closure. They need to know you're sorry." Janice felt a surge of anger. Why should she apologize for her brother's sins? She had nothing to do with it. But as she looked into the eyes of the ghosts surrounding her, she saw their pain, their rage, their desperate need for peace. Janice realized that she was the only one who could help them. The medium pointed towards a door at the back of the house. "The basement. The answers you seek are down there, Janice," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "But be warned, the spirits are powerful there. They feed on fear. You must be strong." Janice, her heart pounding in her chest, rose to her feet. She had to face her fears, for her own sake, and for the sake of the lost souls trapped in the house. Taking a deep breath, Janice slowly descended the creaking basement stairs. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of mildew and decay. Cobwebs brushed against her face and shadows danced in the flickering light of the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Janice made her way through the cluttered basement, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the ghosts on her, their presence growing stronger with each step she took. The basement was a vortex of negative energy, a conduit to the other side. Janice knew that she was in over her head, but there was no turning back. She had to find the answers, no matter the cost. A cold hand grabbed Janice's ankle. She gasped, stumbling forward into the darkness. Panic surged through her as she realized she was surrounded. The ghosts were closing in, their whispers morphing into blood-curdling screams. They wanted her to suffer, to pay for the sins of her family. Struggling to her feet, Janice lashed out, her screams echoing through the empty basement. She stumbled backwards, tripping over a loose floorboard. As she fell, she came face to face with a dusty old trunk tucked beneath the stairs. It called to her, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, Janice scrambled towards the trunk, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. The trunk creaked open, revealing a treasure trove of old photos, letters, and newspaper clippings. As Janice sifted through the contents, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The house had once belonged to a rival mob family. Each photo, each article told a tale of betrayal, violence, and ultimately, death at the hands of the DeMeo crime family. Janice had walked into the heart of a blood feud, a battlefield consecrated by the spirits of the vengeful dead. A blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. Janice's family, alerted by the medium, rushed into the basement, their hearts pounding with fear. But the basement was empty. The ghosts were gone, and so was Janice. The only evidence of her presence was the open trunk, its contents scattered across the floor, and a single white shoe lying abandoned on the bottom step. The police searched for weeks, but Janice was never found. Some whispered that she had finally cracked under the pressure, that she had staged her own disappearance to escape the ghosts of her past. Others believed that the spirits had claimed her, dragging her down into the abyss to join them in their eternal torment. The house stood silent once more, its secrets buried deep within its walls. But some say that on a quiet night, if you listen closely, you can still hear Janice's screams echoing through the empty room.